meeting is being recorded. Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Satyology, Debunking Mythology. Sat means truth, Logos means a study of science, Satyology means a science of truth, a study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which comes from the Sanskrit root word myth, which means a fake lie imagination. So mythology means a study of fake lie imagination or science of fake lie imagination. The Western authors called all native histories as mythology, particularly Indian history. But over the years, the research has proven that the Greek history was mythological, Roman history was mythological, and probably the elements of Old Testament and New Testament were also mythological. But the Indian history, ancient history, I'm talking about Ramayana and Mahabharata, has been mythological. And the way the new history was written of India had also mythological proportions where ideas from the West were incorporated into the history of India. I have a very special guest today who has written a wonderful book on one of the leading thinkers of the Indian society and how it contrasts with the Western viewpoint of India, undivided India, which was a very large territory stretching from Afghanistan to Burma. So without delay, let us welcome Shri Uday Mahurkar. Namaskar,
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be with you once again.
Udayji, this book, I saw your many interviews on this book already. And I was thinking that why I was not the first one to invite you on this book on this channel. Actually, you did speak about this book when you were writing it. You did speak about in the last show. You did speak about this book.
Let me show the cover of this book. This is the book.
Yeah.
You have the image of Veer Savarkar. The title of the book is Veer Savarkar, the man who could have prevented partition.
Yes.
This book is about how Veer Savarkar had the country listened to him and the Congress listened to him. India could have prevented partition of the country. Partition of India is one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century, maybe in the last two centuries.
No,
because
yes, go ahead.
Because about 1.5 million people died. They were killed. Thousands of women were raped.
Yes, continue, Udayji.
Thousands of women were raped.
Yes.
And I think if you talk about the Holocaust, probably this was a greater tragedy than the Holocaust involving the Jews.
So when we thank you for those opening lines. Now, when we talk about, comparison of Holocaust is always not a good idea. People killed innocently anywhere in the world is bad. Innocent people getting killed.
Now, my point is that such a big chapter, it's not about comparison. What I am saying is that the pro-Muslim ideology that the rulers of this country followed after independence also, despite that ideology leading to India's partition, kept people unaware about this Indian Holocaust. How far the politics of vote bank could go, that is what I want to discuss today. Yeah, thank you.
So before we start off, this is one of the book you have written in such a detailed way. So what are the different research materials that you use to compile this information?
You see, this book is basically reinterpretation of Veer Savarkar. Veer Savarkar so far was known as a great revolutionary, as a person who sacrificed his all for the sake of the nation. राजा जी, मैं एक फॉरेन की मीटिंग में आपको फोन करूंगा, मैं कर दूंगा, आप घड़ी घड़ी फोन ना करें. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear. Yes, please continue.
So this book, Savarkar was known so far as a person, as a great revolutionary.
Udayji, when you see my screen as this coming here, That means you're in the full screen. Okay, so don't worry. I'm here, right here.
Okay, no
Okay.
problem.
When you see a logo, that means you're fully on the screen right now. Yeah, please
Don't worry.
continue. Please start. Yeah.
So basically, this book, this book presents a different Savarkar. This Savarkar is also there, but people could not see him. Veer Savarkar is known as the greatest revolutionary in this country, as a person who sustained the revolutionary movement for many, many years, was arrested by the British rulers, sentenced to 50 years imprisonment, a person who inspired great revolutionaries like Madan Lal Dhingra. But here we are presenting a different Savarkar. The Savarkar who tried to prevent India's partition by holding out warnings to the nation, to the people of this country, to the Congress, that their ideology of Muslim appeasement will lead to partition of the country. And then another part which it focuses on is about Savarkar's national security vision. We have shown how Veer Savarkar is actually the father of India's national security. What we want to say is that if Gandhiji is the father of the nation, then Veer Savarkar is the father of India's national security. Because all the problems which India has faced on the national security front, be it with regard to China, be it regard to Pakistan, be it regard to radical Islamic movements, all the warnings about these problems which India faced in the last 70 years were given by Savarkar. The predictions were made by Savarkar about 60 to 80 years ago. So we have gone very deep, and you talked about research material. We have got, Savarkar wrote thousands of pages. He was a great literary figure also in Marathi and English. So a lot of his Marathi material was unexplored so far. That we have explored in this book. And therefore, this book becomes a landmark book. Two things I would like to say. That Manya Mohanji Bhagwat, the chief of the RSS, has written the foreword of this book. He was the one who released the book on 12th October last year, along with Rajnath Singh, the Indian Defence Minister. And Manya Mohan Bhagwatji has written the foreword of this book. And in that foreword, he has written that this book is a guide on how to fight divisive forces to make India a great nation. And I have written in my preface to the book that this book is a guide to preventing another possible partition of the country. But at the same time, we are saying that in last 7 years, ever since this government came into power, led by Mr. Narendra Modi, the Honorable Prime Minister, Savarkar's vision has started getting implemented in this country. So our introduction to the book is titled Dawn of the Savarkar Era. Now, what is Dawn of the Savarkar Era? Rolling back Article 370 from Jammu and Kashmir is Dawn of the Savarkar era. Opening of the doors to Ram Temple is Dawn of the Savarkar era. Many bodies which were acting against the interest of the country, government taking strong measures to stop their foreign funding, is Dawn of the Savarkar era. A person like head preacher like Zakir Naik, who had a free run during the previous governments, the government took steps against him, and actually he is on the run. He is staying outside the country because if he comes to India, he will be arrested for hate speech. This action against Zakir Naik is Dawn of the Savarkar era. So, well, we are saying that India has to be very careful, and if India wants to prevent another partition, if India wants to come out successfully in its fight against divisive forces, it has to follow Savarkar's vision of no compromise with anti-nationals. So that is what this book is about.
So you made some good points here. Now, so when we talk about the Savarkar as a great leader, I've read about him a lot. So I've seen that most of the time the scars of partition in India are very deep, even till date. We want to avoid at the next partition. See, there is a human psychology. Anything you want to avoid happens because it is a Murphy's law. It does happen. Anything which goes wrong will go wrong. Now, the alternative viewpoint is that we need to bring back the India without that mindset of division together, like which means that from Burma to Afghanistan, we have to remove the mindset which caused the division. That is a more proactive strategy. Now, so in your book, what is Savarkar's viewpoint to avoid that kind of mindset?
You see, when you talk about partition, let us be more focused in this discussion. When you talk about partition, it is about the activities of the radical Islamic movements. Those who are pan-Islamists in this country, they dream of converting this country into an Islamic nation maybe 100 years down the line, through population increase, through various other measures. This first partition was caused by Muslim appeasement only. In 1937, when Savarkar came onto the political scene of this country, he was in jail till then for 14 years in rigorous imprisonment and for 13 years in internment in Ratnagiri. In 1937, the British government allowed him to join politics. So when he came onto the political scene, a lot of Congress leaders invited him to join the Congress, including Subhash Chandra Bose. But what Savarkar told them is very significant. He said that Congress is indulging in Muslim appeasement at the cost of Hindu rights. And to do that in this country is betrayal of the nation. And therefore he said, I would like to stand in the last row of patriots than the first row of those who are betraying the nation in the name of patriotism. And he had strong reasons for it. You see, the first instance of Muslim appeasement was the 1916 Lucknow Pact, where in Hindu majority provinces, Congress agreed to give 200 to 300 seats to Muslims against 100 seats of the Hindus in the name of minority protection. Then came the Khilafat movement, which was a pan-Islamist movement, and it was the entire creation of the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi. There, the Muslims of this country started a movement to reinstate the Khalifa of Turkey, who was unseated by British powers, including by foreign powers, including Britishers. So the point with those who opposed Muslim appeasement, the point they raised was, why should Congress and Mahatma Gandhi support a pan-Islamist movement? So, but Congress and Mahatma Gandhi went ahead with it, and that saw a terrible massacre of the Hindus in Kerala. Because when pan-Islamists come into the picture, they see all non-Muslims as one. So there were riots in Kerala. There were anti-Muslim riots in Kerala, anti-Hindu riots in Kerala. Hindus were massacred. Their women were raped. So all these things were before Savarkar in 1937. It was as a result of this Khilafat disaster of Congress that Savarkar wrote his epic work Hindutva, where he defined the ideology of unalloyed nationalism. And it was because of this book, ultimately, that RSS came into being in 1925. So, in 1937, when Savarkar came, the divisionary forces and their designs were clearly before his eyes. For example, in 1930 Muslim League session, Sir Muhammad Iqbal, the great Persian poet, Urdu poet, made a statement at the Allahabad session of the Muslim League. He said that I see in today's Sindh province, Pakistan province, Northwest Frontier, Punjab province, Northwest Frontier province, and Balochistan, a separate homeland for Muslims in future. And as a result of that, as part of Anglo-Muslim conspiracy, Sindh was separated from Mumbai province. So Savarkar could clearly see that things are going in the direction of partition. Therefore, from 1937 onwards, he started warning Congress and the people of this country to beware of the Congress, to beware of the politics of Muslim appeasement. He said India will pay a very heavy price for that. And Savarkar chose to join Hindu Mahasabha, a very small party which believed in protection of Hindu rights. Yes, Aditya ji.
Very good information actually. So when we talk about Savarkar Wad, it was all about integration of India, and I think what you mentioned was that he identified the real problems of India way before any other leader of India. Like he was a visionary in that extent, in that way.
Yes.
Now, how does it conflict with Gandhiwad? Because we all know that Gandhi was in South Africa and he started a movement for protecting the human rights of Africans. And he was the first one to begin that. And then later on, he came to India, and that is also very questioned nowadays because of the letters release of Mountbatten. So, and those new informations are coming on way. So how does it contrast with Gandhiwad?
No. Ideologically, they were poles apart. Savarkar's ideology was protection of national interest at any cost. Savarkar's ideology was against total non-violence. He said total non-violence as defined by Gandhiji was to submit to the attacker. If somebody attacks you, you don't retaliate. Keep on taking the blows. Savarkar said this is perversion of virtue. In Hindi, he called it Sadgun Vikruti. So, and the two factors which led to India's partition were the Muslim appeasement policies of Gandhiji and Congress, and the ideology of total non-violence. Not many would be aware that in the Second World War, Gandhiji was so much moved by the bloodbath in the Second World War that he told many leaders, including Abul Kalam Azad, that he wanted to commit suicide. Then he advised Churchill, when bombs were being rained on London by German planes, he advised Churchill not to retaliate, but rely on his moral strength. So it is very clear that the partition of the country was caused by two things. One, the Muslim appeasement policy of the Congress, of which Muslim League took full advantage to make more and more demands, and the last demand was Pakistan. And the ideology of complete non-violence. When Muslim League started riots in the country, knowing very well that Congress would not retaliate, that Congress would not ask its followers to retaliate, Savarkar warned. There was a leader called Acharya Kriplani. He told Kriplani, those who are trying to force a separate nation by dividing this country at the point of sword, at the point of civil war, if you surrender to those people today, tomorrow they will become a separate nation, and when they have their own army, own air force, and own instruments, what they will do to India, you won't be able to imagine. What calamity will befall the Hindus, you won't be able to imagine, and that is what has exactly happened. Every day, Indian soldiers die in Kashmir because of terrorism sponsored by Pakistan. I would even go to the extent that even Taliban, the birth of Taliban was also indirectly predicted by Savarkar, because Taliban, the father of Taliban is Pakistan army. And Savarkar had warned that if Pakistan comes into being, a state based on religious fanaticism comes into being, then we have a great threat in our neighborhood. And that is what has happened. Aditya ji.
You know, you mentioned about the word Taliban. That mindset has existed since the time of the invention of Islamism, because that mindset is still there against the kafir. And the kafir wad was very prominent everywhere, because the fear of kafirs is what drives them to violence against kafir. Now, when we talk about the core principles of integration of Northeast, as well as of against the division of India into the religion-based division of India, what were Savarkar's views on integrating Northeast and also preventing the division based on faith?
Savarkar used to say that conversion of Hindus is basically denationalization. That is what he used to say. And with a lot of evidence, you know. Because after all, 80% of the Muslims in this country are basically converts from Hindu religion. And that's how these demands are. Not that all of them have become radicals. I still believe a significant part of the Muslims and Christians today still want to remain in the mainstream. But it is equally true that a significant part of their communities is into pan-Christianism, pan-Islamism. So basically, he used to say that conversion is equivalent to denationalization. That is what he used to say. And therefore, he had launched a big reconversion movement also. Aditya ji.
So one of the things which comes in, like when we talk about, especially what you mentioned in the book is, one is that we always live in the fear of being converted. Another is taking proactive steps to bring people to a natural way of life, which is Sanatan Dharma, natural way of life. And when we work on that aspect, when we try to bring the people back into the Sanatan Dharma way of life, that is not conversion. That is like bringing back people, giving them empowerment. Because when people convert to other faiths, they are not empowered. They have to now follow a diktat. Like ask any convert, they have to then follow so many rules, which they don't follow in the house. Only outside the house they follow. So to show to the world. So what was the strategy or the plan to bring back people back to Sanatan Dharma, according to Savarkar?
No, Savarkar supported Arya Samaj reconversion movement, and because his fight was basically political. You know, this work of reconversion involves even social activity. Savarkar had very little time. I think better we talk about his national security vision. I think that will be very interesting for our viewers here, you know. Let me tell you that Savarkar was the first to see the threat of China, which is India's biggest threat today. Today's China came into being in 1948. In 1952 and in 1948, China was much weaker than India militarily as well as economically. But in 1952, Savarkar saw that China had overtaken India in terms of military strength. At that time, he warned the Nehru government and the nation that China is going ahead of us. We will face a threat from China in future. And he called upon the nation to become a nuclear state in 1952, which India did not become and chose to become 25 years later. In 1954, when Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru came up with the principle of Panchashil, saying that if these 5 principles are followed by India and its neighboring nations, they would be able to live in peace. Savarkar said that after the way China has followed Tibet, talking in such weak terms with China would add to its thirst to swallow foreign land. And I won't be surprised if the same policy continues with China. China would attack India itself and swallow its land. And that prediction came true 8 years later in 1962 when China attacked India and swallowed a large part of India's land. In 1954, he issued another statement. He said, Mr. Nehru, your panchil comprises beads of the rosary, what you call mala in Hindi, you know. When you chant mantras, you hold a mala. So your panchil is beads of the rosary, while the panchil of China are bombs, machine guns, tanks, missiles. And then he called upon the youth of this country to beware of the policies which the Nehru government was following. Mind you, at that time, in our ordnance factories, where weapons had to be made, the factories were making tea. This was the state of affairs on the national security front. So Savarkar issued an appeal, called upon the Indian youth to beware of this ideology, of this total neglect of national security, and said that if India wants to become a great nation, it has to become a military power. And he said that if other nations produce hydrogen bombs, we should produce oxygen bombs. Because he believed that military strength is the ultimate decider of a nation's greatness. We Indians take great pride in saying that we will become a Vishwaguru. According to Savarkar's ideology, the way I interpret it, India cannot become a Vishwaguru till it becomes a military power, till it becomes a military superpower. So, on the diplomacy front, he said, no two nations can be permanent friends or permanent enemies. Their relationship will be decided by their needs. It is the needs of the two nations which decide their relations with each other. That is what he said. And how we suffered by keeping away from Savarkar's national security vision, we got any number of evidences and proofs. For example, in the 1965 Indo-Pak War, India was only 13 kilometers away from Lahore. And Savarkar had said at the time of partition that India should treat Pakistan as a rebel province and force it to merge with India again, which policy Congress never followed, or Congress did not have the guts to follow. So in 1965, we were only 13 kilometers away from Lahore, the biggest city of Pakistan. But Indian Army, because of Gandhian ideology, accepted ceasefire. We should have captured Lahore. Had we captured Lahore, which is the hub of Pakistan, we would have broken Pakistan and we could have even merged Pakistan with India. You know. And then next in 1966, in the Tashkent Agreement, we surrendered whatever we had won in the 1965 war. 71 war, when Mrs. Gandhi divided Pakistan into two parts, Indians felt that there is a Savarkar who is reborn. But it came untrue next year when in the Shimla Agreement, India failed to take back Pakistan occupied Kashmir in spite of holding 1 lakh Pakistani soldiers as refugees, as captive. And over and above that, it gave back the 3 sub-districts, Hindu-dominated sub-districts that India had won in Pakistan. The result was that those Hindus got so scared, Pakistani Hindus, that 1 lakh Hindus migrated to India in 1971 because of fear of retaliation of the Pakistani army. So, in nutshell, regarding, let's talk about Assam. Correct? Today, Assam has 35% Muslim population. In 1941, Savarkar was the first person to warn, first non-Assamese to warn that the migration of East Bengal Muslims happening in the Brahmaputra Valley in Assam will pose a great threat, not only to the culture of Assam, but also to the security of India's northeast frontier. That time, Jawaharlal Nehru said, India abhors vacuum. Nature abhors vacuum. What he meant to say, if there is a vacant space, people will come and stay there. How can we stop them? Savarkar, in his own harsh way, retorted. He said Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has very poor knowledge of how the environment operates. And he said nature also abhors poisonous gas. And his prediction has come true. That time, the Muslim population in Assam was only 12%, and majority of them were local Muslims, not the Bengali Muslims. Today, the total population of Bengal, Muslim population in Bengal is 35%, more than 35%. So Savarkar's each and every warning has come true. So we say that had we followed Savarkar's ideology, India would have become a superpower by now, militarily as well as economically. And Savarkar used to say that just becoming economic superpower is no guarantee of your security, because your roads, if they are good, they can be used by the invading army to invade the country. So Veer Savarkar, we have said that Veer Savarkar is a savant, is a unifier, is a prophet, because the way he predicted problems which India came to face later. Something I want to share about his ideology. You see, Savarkar was fighting radical Muslims. He was not fighting Muslim community. And his Hindutva is basically unalloyed nationalism without any condition. In his Hindu manifesto, Savarkar says that in independent India, all castes, all religions will have equal rights. He goes a step further and says, if the prayers of religious minorities, namely Christians and Muslims, are interrupted by anybody, the state will step in and ensure that they are able to offer their prayers in the way they want. However, he warns at the third point. He says, nation will not allow creation of a nation within a nation in the name of religious minoritism, which is the story of this nation over the last 70 years. In 1947, within 10 years of 1947, Jawaharlal Nehru forged an alliance with the Kerala Muslim League in Kerala. But he forged an alliance with the same party which had caused India's partition. And thereafter, Muslim appeasement policies continued to rise. It is only in the last 7 years that we are seeing a rollback of those policies. Aditya ji.
You raised a very important point on the national security area. And these views really match the views even in the Mahabharata also. When I wrote one of the book was The Making of a Statesman, in which Narad Muni tells Yudhishthir that the Sanatan Dharma is spread through militaries to install Dharma, and Dharma brings peace and prosperity to everyone. But over the years, in the face of secularism, India has forgotten that. Now, secularism word was invented in the West to keep the church out of the power. And that was the main reason secularism was invented. In India, the secularism is interpreted in a wrong way. It's about the religion. It becomes more about the religion, whereas in the West, the secularism means to keep the religion out of politics. So,
very true.
So the misinterpretation of the English words into Indian connotations has led to this kind of viewpoint. So what was his viewpoint on secularism, the real secularism, when we're talking about?
There was no word called secularism at that time in the political debate, It has been brought by the Congress to divide the Indian society, take the help of minorities and come to power and sustain the power. So but Savarkar's view is very clear that no community will get special treatment. All will be treated equally. And therefore, in 1938, when he went to Lahore as Hindu Mahasabha president, some press reporters asked him as to why Savarkarji, you and Jinnah are bent upon dividing the nation along religious lines. The reply that Savarkar gave is very significant. Savarkar said that your reply itself is wrong. Me and Jinnah are not birds of the same feather. Well, Jinnah is for more and more concession for Muslims. I am for equal treatment for all. So, in 1939, when a set of Shia Muslims in Lucknow passed a resolution saying Muslims who slaughter cows will be considered enemy of Hindu community, of Hindu-Muslim unity. Secondly, they said that Muslims will not object to religious processions being passed, Hindu religious processions passing by from near the mosques. That time, Savarkar welcomed the proposals of the Shia Muslims of Lucknow and issued a statement where he assured them that your effort is very genuine, and if such genuine efforts to bring Muslim unity, Hindu-Muslim unity are made, then Hindu-Muslim unity is possible. And he also promised them that when you say that you will not object to Hindu religious processions from being taken out from near the mosque, we also will try to convince the Hindus that they should not do it deliberately. So he was Savarkar who was secular. If you apply the term secular, it is Savarkar who was totally secular, and not the Congress or its leaders. Aditya ji.
So the mistranslation of Western vocabulary into Indian language has caused so much of disturbance. Like because the Indian meaning.
No, you just see what all it has caused. After giving Pakistan to Muslims, Muslims are receiving preferential treatment in this country at the cost of majority rights. I don't think there is any example in the world of this sort. Just imagine that during the medieval period, Muslim invaders, they demolished lakhs of temples. India has taken 70 years to get back Ram Mandir in Ayodhya. 70 years. My point is, after having given Pakistan to Indian Muslims on their demand, why should majority community or Hindus should be denied of their basic rights? Why there is a delay in freeing Ram Janmabhoomi from Muslim control? There are two in Ram Janmabhoomi and in Kashi Vishwanath. There are mosques which were standing just beside the temple. Why those mosques should not be removed to some other place? You know, Article 30. In Article 30, those schools which get government aid, among those schools, if the schools belong to minorities, to Muslims, they can keep a Maulvi, and the payment will be made from government money, from government aid. But a Hindu school aided by the government cannot keep a Pandit to teach Gita. So, like this, there are several examples. There are several examples, you know. So, basically, the policies which led to, and two more things I want to tell you, which will shock you. The Muslim embezzlement policies of the Congress are embedded in two resolutions. One, part 2 of the Pakistan resolution passed by Jinnah in 1940, March 23. We know about the first part of the resolution where Jinnah asked for a separate homeland for Indian Muslims. But there is a second part in it about which people do not know. The second part defined as to how those Muslims who stay back in India will be treated by the Indian state. In that, Muslim League had demanded several safeguards, which was special treatment, you know. Same policy has been continued by Congress after independence. So the Muslim embezzlement policies of Congress are part 2 of the Pakistan resolution, number 1. Number 2, the foreign policy of India for the first 50-60 years was embedded was embedded in the 1921 Khilafat resolution of the Congress. The 1921 Khilafat resolution of the Congress said that independent India's foreign policy will take into consideration the religious obligations of the Muslims. And just see how the same policy was followed by Congress in the first 50, 60 years. Take, for example, the case of Israel. Israel became a state in 1948. One of the first resolutions which Israel passed was expressing gratitude to India for the protection which India and Hindus gave to Jews over the last 2000 years, as compared to the atrocities they have faced in various parts of the world. But India took 44 years to give full recognition to Israel. The reason was that India's foreign policy with regard to Israel was guided by the local Muslim community and local Muslim leadership. So India has suffered a lot. It is only in the last 7 years that we are unshackling ourselves from such policies of Muslim appeasement. Aditya ji.
See, the Jews in Israel, one of their foreign policy planks is the protection of Jews all over the world. Israel speaks for all the Jews of the world. Hindus are the only community where their home nation, India, doesn't speak for them, even in the neighborhood of India, Pakistan or Bangladesh. And which is a reality, because see, when Hindus are in problem in North America, we have no protection other than the US Constitution. And or people living in Canada also have no protection other than the Canadian Constitution. Now, when it comes to Muslims, there is a whole group of Muslim countries, they speak on it. The whole group of for Christians, United States speak for it. Most of the Western countries speaks for it. Now, where is the policy change, do you think, according to Savarkar's vision or Savarkar's India vision, which happens for Hindus today? Political support.
No. I think it should happen in future. You see, there has been a baggage of 60 years that you have to appreciate that, and this government is slowly bringing India out of that baggage. You saw the opening of the Kashi corridor. There is now a corridor going to be built in Ujjain, much bigger than Kashi corridor. So things are happening. Things will come along the lines you expect. It will take time, because India is a multicultural country. India has a very complex situation, and which was made several times more complex by the policies of the Congress. So the baggage of 60 years will take time to go away. But I think this policy will come very soon. See, and it must come. I fully agree with you.
See, the thing is, like, if you look at Israel and if you look at the West promotes Catholic Church and protects Catholic Church in a big way in every part of the world. The Western governments, even though they're secular in nature, they do that. Now, in the case of India, we see that whenever the issues of Hindus come, we always say it will take time. But it takes just 2 seconds to make a statement. Like recently what happened in Bangladesh, Indian government did not react strongly. So there is a saying that sari dunya ka boj hum uthate hain, log aate chale jate. Hindus generally.
No, you should also appreciate, Aditya ji, the Citizens Amendment Act, CAA. It was done with a view to protecting Hindus. So it is not so that the government has not done anything, but yes, much more needs to be done. I agree with you.
In the CAA Act also, all minorities were covered. Christians were covered. In fact, people who are Sikh were covered, Buddhists were covered, and Hindus were covered. All of them were covered. But in case of, like, if you look at the politics in Fiji, like I'm taking an example of Fiji, where the local Fijians, they rejected a Hindu prime minister at one point. And there was a big support needed, because Fijian is 45% Hindu, 55% locals over there. Now, that is one example. Second is the island of Maldives, which is a majority Muslim nation now, but earlier it was a majority Hindu nation. And there also the support was sought. in Trinidad Tobago, which is in the Caribbean, the support was sought for the Hindus. So generally, Hindus are at the mercy of Bhagavad Gita and Sanatan
No,
Dharma.
no, you see, as I told you, you're absolutely true when it comes to India's policies say 7 years ago. But things are changing now, and things will change further in a big way.
I really see the change, and I see that Indian government is doing a lot to protect their own culture. 65 million Americans practice yoga. 65 million. And it is connected to India. Nobody can deny that, even though the churches have come up with Christian yoga now because of its popularity. Now, the point is the point is that the Indian education system has to change a lot, because Indian education system diminishes the value of the Indian civilization. What do you think? What was Savarkar's view on that Indian civilization?
No, Savarkar said that those religions which are born in India, India is the fatherland of those followers of those religions, namely Sanatan Hindus, Jains, Sikhs, Buddhists, and the animists. They're all part of the Hindu pantheon. That is how he saw it. They share a common culture, maybe not always the common gods, but then they are rooted in this land, and therefore, for them, India is their fatherland. Savarkar was very clear about it. His views were unequivocal on these issues. Aditya
Udayji, one last question in this session is...
I'm not able to hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So one last session. So for the readers also. So what are the important things people can get from this book? Most important things they can learn from this book. And also I would like for the viewers to see the link in the description, so you can get this book online. Is it available on Kindle as well?
It is available on Amazon.
Amazon. So it's available on Amazon. People can buy this book. So what are the key important things that
I would urge the viewers here to buy this book, to know as to how India suffered by keeping away from Savarkar's vision, how India can become a great nation, and how if India becomes a superpower, how it will behave differently as compared to the superpowers of today, which is there in his book Hindutva. The last page of the book Hindutva of Savarkar is very important. In that he says, a day will come when the world will to face the power of Hindutva, the power of Hindus. But he defines, how will India behave with those people who accept India's superiority militarily and spiritually, and spiritually. He says India will not act. India will act only on the basis of what has been said in Gita or what God Buddha had laid down. What he says, we must understand this, since you are in America. He says that when India becomes a superpower, it will not exploit smaller nations militarily and economically as the present superpowers are doing. That is how I interpret it. He didn't say that. India becoming a superpower and a military power would benefit the entire humanity. That is not happening now with today's superpowers. That is what he said. Aditya ji.
Obviously, I think India has always spread the message of peace, and unfortunately or fortunately, the Indian leaders, which Indians consider as leaders, are not promoted by the West. Like, for example, there is a significant leftist opposition to Prime Minister Modi also in the foreign countries, even though the governments support him. But you are absolutely right that when India becomes militarily powerful, more powerful, then other countries will begin to respect it. And also there is a notion that even though India becomes militarily powerful, they're never going to use it. So that assurance of non-use of military power makes others less confident about India. What is your view on that?
No. After all, we can't as a nation we cannot copy the wrong things of other superpowers. Our own vision of superpower has to be different. It has to benefit the entire humanity, and there is enough provision in the Hindutva ideology for self-protection. Gita is a living example. Gita preaches war against even the brother if the brother is bad for the society. So there is enough. Only, I read one book by Gandhiji called My Religion. In that he says, to my utter shock, that after all, Yudhishthir's victory in Mahabharat war was an empty victory, because so many lives were lost in that war. So my question was, should he have allowed disrobing of Draupadi? Should he have surrendered to the demonic demands of the Kauravas? So the need of the hour is to teach our scriptures properly to the young generation. There is enough in it for self-protection. I don't think there is any book which says that even if your brother is wrong, is bad for the society, fight him and finish him. I don't think there is another book, any other book says that.
Well,
it is the supreme righteous path. Gita is the supreme righteous path.
I've written a book on Yudhishthir, the greatest Samrat, in which I have clarified most of these misconceptions also. And one of the things is comes to the mind is in Mahabharat, the Narad Muni says we have to proactively militarily defeat the adharmic forces, because Mahabharat and Gita, they work on dharma and adharma. So
yes,
so that's how it is done. And but a lot of things are there, because when we create a self-proclaimed boundaries on what we can do, what we cannot do, then we become prisoner of our own goodness and our own passion. And that's what Gita completely destroys. But Udayji, it's a pleasure to speak with you. And please share me the link of your book, which we can put it on the video as well, so people can see the book and also get.
I will send it. I will send it to you by. Let me check with the publishers, and I'll send it to you on your WhatsApp.
Yes, please do that. And for viewers who are watching it, do read this book. It has made a lot of waves in India. A lot of people are talking about this book now in India.
Here is it again.
Yes. Actually, we are doing the second show on this book. One you did before the book was released, and now we are doing the second show after the book is released. We're already doing the second show on this. So please get this book and read it and see that what the Indian leaders think of India and what were the real problems in India. If you want to learn more about India, this book is an excellent guide on the current political thought process or the recent political thought process. So thank you so much, Udayji. As usual, always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Namaste.